Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we'll be talking about the show X-Men 97. Fun fact, the show's title gets its 97 due to the original series ending in 1997. This season came out in 2024 and stars George Buza, Dodd, and Chou, and was created by Beau DeMayo. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. X-Men 97 takes place following the death of Professor Xavier. The team is surprised to see that the professor has left his school and the team to his former friend and arch nemesis Magneto. The team must put aside their issues with their new leader to confront some old villains and some new ones that will really test them as a team. X-Men 97 is an action superhero show. It has similar vibes to X-Men the Animated Series, X-Men Evolution, or Young Justice. X-Men 97 is structured interestingly to me. There is an overarching story, but we also have a lot of character side stories that help you understand the characters more. The interesting part to me is that at first I didn't think that the episodes were connecting at all, but then as the season was finishing, I was able to draw the connections. The way it was structured really helped me to care more about the characters and understand them a little bit better. X-Men the Animated Series and X-Men Evolution is part of the reason why I love superhero media today, and so I was excited when this show was announced and knew I was going to watch. While I did enjoy the original, I rewatched part of it before this one came out, and the dialogue in that show is so cringe, and I'm so happy that in this show they made sure that the dialogue is much more digestible. I thought they would keep the animation style, but they changed it up obviously because it's almost 30 years later. But the animation was so colorful and they did a great job showing the emotions of these characters. Some scenes even looked like a video game, and the line delivery was just very reminiscent of like an arcade game like Street Fighter from the 90s. I have mixed feelings about reboots, but I think that this show rebooted a show and somehow improved on its predecessor, which is a feat not many can say that they did. I cannot go without talking about the theme song and the intro because no matter what you think about the show, that theme song is epic and I feel like it gets you excited to watch the episode and is a great way to remind you of all of the characters. I like how, as the roster changed, so did the intro, but they kept the end part with Magneto and Professor X going head to head with their respective teams. If you pay attention, you'll also hear the theme song in some of the episodes, but it's arranged differently to fit the tone of the scene that it's in, which I thought was cool. They also kept the theme in the end credits, but it's a much more mellow tone as you are just kind of taking in everything that just happened in the episode. Omega level mutant is something I've been hearing about more lately, and one that stands out for me is the one and only Storm, because she is one of my favorite mutants. I feel like we never really get to see what an Omega level mutant would look like on screen, but in this show they give it to us in the first episode. Cyclops drops this dope line, give them the forecast, which had me excited. And then we see the Sentinels say Omega level threat detected. And I knew something was about to go down and I was losing my mind. Storm uses her powers to summon lightning to heat up the sand so that it becomes glass and then makes a glass tornado, which was such an inventive way to show not only how powerful she is, but also how smart she is with her powers. Later on, we also see Magneto, another Omega level mutant, who shows how much he can do with his magnetic powers. I was so sad that Storm lost her powers in episode 2, partly because I love that character, but also because I hate when powerful characters in shows have powers and then temporarily lose them for like a whole season. Thankfully, this show didn't follow suit and make us wait an entire season, just a couple of episodes. In the episode where she gets her powers back, she is attempting to save Forge while being hunted by a demon, and she is at her lowest point when this demon, called the Adversary, also confines her in a small space, which brings up her claustrophobia. But instead of submitting, she fights back and not only escapes but gets her powers back in an epic moment. I love how after this episode she rejoins the team and helps save Jubilee and reminds us of how powerful she is. Rogue is a character I feel bad for because she can't touch the one she loves without hurting them. We start off the season with her and Gambit, who I loved as a couple, but she struggled not touching him. And with Magneto, she was able to because of his powers, which made her have to choose between the two. And she chooses Magneto for a minute and realizes that that wasn't the right decision. But we come to see that she was too late to rectify her relationship with Gambit because the Sentinel ends up attacking. While trying to save Genosha, she's incapacitated by Gambit because she was almost shot down. And at the end of the day, he still loves her and doesn't want her to get hurt. But this leads to his death, which is sad because the episode ends with her saying, "I can't feel you," which is something that is also said by Wanda in the WandaVision show in a sad scene as well with her and Vision. Her character shows grief beautifully and shows how sometimes it makes you change your perspective on things. And for Rogue, that eventually leads her to align with Magneto because she has seen what the worst of humans can do and how much they can take away. The other characters do not understand her reasoning, but she reminds them that they weren't at Genosha, which I think is an important point. They witnessed it from afar, and it was really sad, but Rogue is the only X-Men who was actually there and made it out alive, which I'm sure also brings on this sense of guilt. I know Rogue stole powers from Captain Marvel in the OG series, but I forgot just how powerful she is. When she is looking for Trask, she goes to a government building where General Ross says the building is made to keep the Hulk out, and then she proceeds to get in. Her emotions probably played a part, but I was like, wow, Rogue is pretty strong. I love how she directed that strength in the last episode at Bastion and gave him the best hooks to his face while saying the line, "His name was Gambit, remember it," which also had me on the edge of my seat cheering for her. And she didn't let up. She was punching and headbutting, and I just felt like they did her justice. One subtle thing is that while she's fighting Bastion, she also is shedding tears because the emotions are probably just still so raw, and this is the person who killed the one that she loves the most. Speaking of Gambit, I love how in such a short time on this show, he made such a big impact on the story and the characters' lives. Even though Rogue has her own issues with not touching people, I feel like Gambit tried really hard to help accommodate that so that she felt loved and never felt left out. I was sad when he saw Rogue leave Magneto's room and then they danced and kissed in Genosha, but I feel like he knew that she still loved him as much as he loved her. He had a very awesome way to go out, which is him going straight for the Sentinel to prevent them from hurting others, and the Sentinel stabbing him, which could have been the end. But he uses his last bit of energy to supercharge the Sentinel and say a very Gambit line. The name's Gambit, remember it, which was such a dope line, and it was said at the perfect moment, right before he made that Sentinel go boom. And also, it was the title of the episode. I was shook after that episode, but even though he was dead, you could still feel his influence throughout the season. Cyclops is a character that I have never liked, and I think that for the first time, this show changed that. From the first episode, I loved how he used his powers in such a creative way. When saving Roberto, he used his powers to push them away from the villains, and when the Sentinels shot down their aircraft out of the sky, he let all of the flyers save the non-flyers, and then he used his beams to land, and he really stood out as a leader. This show also made me get clarification about his powers, which are red but are not heat based powers, but instead they are a heatless concussive force. So it's kind of like getting hit by something very hard. I hate seeing the love triangle with him, Jean, and Wolverine because it's played out now. And while this show did not have that, thankfully, they did have a love triangle with him, Madeline, and Jean for a minute, which was more complicated than the Wolverine one, to say the least. Scott and Madeline had a baby named Nathan, better known as Cable, who was experimented on by Mr. Sinister. It was sad that he had to send him away as a baby for a chance of survival, and how he was trying so hard not to become like his father and abandon his child without saying goodbye. He loses Madeline in Genosha, which is clearly hard for him to add on to this trauma. He eventually is reunited with his son, and I love seeing them and Jean team up to take on the Prime Sentinels and prove that the Summers family is one that you want on your side. To add to him not being there for Nathan's life, he also has to separate from him during the last battle, in which Jean telepathically links them so that he can say goodbye and shows Cable or Nathan how he has his dad's eyes. After he says goodbye, he is trying to save Earth from an asteroid, and we see him take off his visors to supercharge something, and he is crying, which is just so sad to see. Jean Grey or Madeline Pryor or Goblin Queen, you just never know which one you might get. I was kind of surprised to see them tackle the Madeline storyline because clones can get a little bit confusing, but they handled it well. Looking back, it was cool to see how it was hinted in the first episode when Madeline used Cerebro and felt this connection to Jean but didn't understand it. It was sad that they didn't know when they were switched, and this led to some drama and some confusion with Scott. One thing that was kind of funny was Jean catching Scott and Madeline having like a telepathic date, and she said, "Girl, your time is up." I love how even though Cable isn't technically her son, she stepped up to be the mother he didn't have and helped Scott deal with his grief. When rewatching the OG show, I just felt like Jean was always just so dramatic and crying, and her powers were so weak. And I was just so happy that in this show they fixed that. Like, we see her lift half a building and launch it into the sea. And I was like, oh yeah, this show is just showing the Jean that I knew and loved. In the end, she was going toe to toe with Sinister, and she was holding her own, launching whatever she could and giving that man a run for his money until he decided to use Cable against her. And to be completely honest, I think that she could have taken Cable out, but I think that she lost on purpose because she didn't want Cyclops to have to choose between the two. But surprise, surprise, she was not dead because if anything, we know that the Phoenix rises from the ashes, and the Phoenix definitely did wake up in this moment, proving that there was still some left in her. And the Phoenix gets Bastion under control with ease, and then unravels Sinister's DNA, which I wouldn't have even thought about that, and making him pretty much useless. And, one of the funny things about that whole moment that I love is just basically him being like, "What do you think that you can do to me?" And she's like, "All I do is think. Like, I'm thinking of ways to ruin your life all the time, and I'm about to right now." Which she does and makes him super ugly. And it just made me realize why I fell in love with his character. Also, the phoenix rising from the bottom of a lake seemed very reminiscent of the live action films, but better written. Nightcrawler becomes a mainstay after the Genosha destruction episode, and I was glad we got to see more of him. Nightcrawler is a German mutant who is very religious, which makes him perfect to give the eulogy for Gambit. But don't be mistaken, he will fight to protect the ones he loves. He is very smart in how he uses his teleporting skills, and he has a tail that just seems like another limb for him. There's a scene where he teleports with Wolverine, and it was cool to experience what someone traveling with him would experience. He is very protective of Rogue, and when the Sentinels come and Wolverine says something about 6 reasons for resisting, and then Nightcrawler comes in with these swords and says, actually 9. I knew some crap was about to hit the fan, and it did, because he was up in there teleporting and slicing and dicing and chopping off heads and hands. And even with, his teleporting skills, he is still good in just hand to hand combat as well. So he is just like a double threat, maybe triple, because he has a tail. I just felt like he brought the right thing to the show at the right time, which for me I thought was a support system for Rogue and kind of being like her protector while she was in a coma. I think my favorite part about Wolverine in this show is that he was barely in it. He's still his grumpy self when he's on screen, except maybe when he's with Morph. He has been the star child of X-Men media, and I feel like after all of the live action movies, I got a little tired of his character because, in my opinion, there were more interesting characters to focus on. He was the only one who I could see actually fighting Magneto and going, for blood. But I did not expect to see Magneto rip out his adamantium skeleton from his body and leave him clinging to life. The show gave me the perfect amount of Wolverine and made sure the show focused on this team as a whole, not just Wolverine. Morph gave us a look at so many superheroes, and I love when in battle I would just see one and be like, oh, I know them. A small thing I noticed is that Morph uses they them pronouns, which is something that really just fits the character. Morph and Wolverine's relationship is hinted at being much more than friends throughout the season, and in the finale, Morph confesses their feelings for him as the future is very unsure for everyone. They also added some comedic relief throughout the season. And one of my favorites is when he shows Sinister what he looks like after the Phoenix strips his DNA, which I think was just perfect after what Sinister did to Morph as well as to Jean Grey. Jubilee isn't as big this season in terms of being on the front lines with the Sentinels, but I think her role is still very important. She's helping Roberto come to terms with his mutant abilities and realizes that he is being discriminated against. I think that yes, the big battles are important, but through her character, we see that sometimes the path in front of you is helping others realize who they are and accept it and show them that they may be different, but that does not make them any less than, and that they should embrace their uniqueness, which is something that she helps Roberto do. She gets sucked into one of Mojo's games, and we see an older version of her, and I wonder if that character will come back into play in the future. Her powers have been described as fireworks, even though it's way more than that. And she has been shown as kind of weak, but in the finale, they finally let her have a moment to show that she is not weak when she is able to hold her own against Bastion and launched him into some machinery and had his face all discombobulated and leaking. Hopefully, some of the team will let her have, a bigger role, or maybe she'll step into a bigger role now that most of the team is missing. And, we can explore how her powers can grow. Also, to say I was pissed when Roberto attacked her when the professor's team was going against Magneto's is an understatement. Like, she was nothing but nice to you, and this is how you treat her? He kind of redeemed himself in the next episode by saving her from falling out of the asteroid, but better not do that again. Bastion was a cool villain who was playing Puppet Master all season and finally stepped out of the shadows when he was ready to set his plan in motion. His human sentinels were crazy strong, and I was worried when the X-Men couldn't take out one and then saw that he had an entire army. His powers were cool, even though he used them for bad things. I just have to say, I think that Professor and Magneto are both wrong, and the solution is probably a mix of their ideas. Xavier wants mutants and humans to coexist, but seems to ignore the fact that humans hate what they don't understand and can't control and have no interest in being second on the food chain and will do whatever they can to get back on top. Magneto is right about how humans will attack mutants, but he is also feeding their hate by constantly instilling fear into them by, having a giant meteor floating over them and then using his powers to shut off all power to the entire world, basically ruining infrastructure. These two fight about this constantly, but the way that they are going about this isn't the best. Professor X is always talked about because of his abilities and how strong they are, but oftentimes I feel like we see him use Cerebro to find something, and then he sends his students to deal with it, and we don't really actually see him using his own powers or like the great extent of his powers. In this season, we see how when he's with the Shi'ar Empire and everyone is just arguing about, who's marrying who and yada yada yada, he is able to pull everyone's conscience into a classroom in someone's mind, let's just assume it's him, and talk through the situation and find a non-violent course of action. And he also kind of gives them a little history lesson. In the finale, we see he is so powerful that once Magneto's helmet is off, he is able to control him and use his powers to reverse what he did. And following that, he is able to restore Magneto's psyche that he also just destroyed. I was shocked that he was alive and happy that Cyclops didn't hold back with his irritation for how the professor handled stuff when he supposedly died. While Professor is with the Shi'ar Empire, we meet Deathbird, who delivers a funny line when she is talking about her disdain for intermingling with humans because she thinks that they are inferior and doesn't want to be in alliance with them. She says,
Xavier would see his Milky Way ghetto become our new throne world.
and I just could not stop laughing because the disrespect. Magneto is a character who is trying so hard to change, which is shown to be pretty hard. He has a monologue in episode 2 about it when he takes the world leaders up into space and explains that mutants deserve to live in a world and not to be hunted down. I love it when he says, "Do not make me let you down," which is a nice way to threaten someone and let them know that if some crazy stuff happens, it's your fault. Surprise to no one, they let him down with what happens in Genosha, and he is captured and, has an inhibitor collar. So he's not able to do something. And once he is freed, he ends up turning off the power to the world and keeping his promise. This shows how much he has held back over the years because he has had the power to make them extinct and decided not to. It was perfect timing that Xavier comes back, which coincided with him returning to his evil side and donning his iconic outfit again. The episode title Remember It was one of the most intense episodes I've watched in a while and just had me completely shocked that it wasn't even like a finale episode. It was cool to see all of these side characters that X-Men fans would be familiar with and to see Genosha and how it's a thriving haven for mutants and the mutants there look happy. We see Nightcrawler, who is a ray of sunshine, but things start going downhill. Gambit and Rogue start going through a rough patch, and then there is an attack that kills so many and causes so much devastation. It was like we as the viewer were there with them trying to evacuate and find survivors while also running away from the Sentinel. We see Gambit die and we think we see Magneto die, but it's sad that a place that's supposed to be a sanctuary ends up being a gravesite for so many. This episode had me feeling sad by the end, but also let me know that the show wasn't afraid to tackle difficult storylines. Remember It Further showed the discrimination that mutants face as a marginalized group, which is evident throughout the season. In episode 1, we are introduced to it from the get-go with the executioner and the goons that he has going after Roberto. In episode 2, he incites violence at a hearing for Magneto, which is very reminiscent of January 6th. So if you are siding with the executioner, maybe you should take some time to think about stuff. I think that with this discrimination, you may think, how would the X-Men be a marginalized group because they have these powers? But you have to think about that they are the exception because they are representing mutants, and there are many mutants who don't have powers like theirs and can't be used in a fight. And also, some of the mutations are physical, so they actually look different. And the X-Men aren't, just trying to make a way for themselves. They're fighting for everyone that is a mutant. They have limited influence and power to make actual change in the world, but are trying their best to change it by showing that they are there to help and that they are not the enemies. Superhero powers have always been something that fascinates me, and as I've gotten older, it fascinates me more when they use their powers in inventive ways. This show had some cool ways that they use them, like Cyclops using them to move quicker in a battle or to help him land from God knows how high up he was, Storm creating a glass tornado, Gambit charging Wolverine's claws, older Jubilee using their powers as like rollerblades, Magneto shutting off power to, the entire world, and that's just a few. The inventive use of powers helped make the fight scenes even better and had me invested in how they would defeat their enemy. I feel like there are ways to use powers that took more time to think about and also made the viewer think about what the limitations are to some of these superheroes' powers. The one thing that is pretty constant is that the characters seem to feel very comfortable about not only using their powers, but like how they use them. The costumes in animated shows sometimes seem to stay the same for the entire show, but it happens so much that I don't usually notice. The show let some of the characters explore different costumes, which were reflective of something that they may have worn in the comic books, and I love that they were willing to have some of the X-Men have more than one costume. I must point out, though, that Storm's costume change was the best from the lead up to the reveal, and following closely behind that is Madeline's turning into the Goblin Queen, who had a Sailor Moon like transformation and went from like your normal, typical little housewife to villainous. I love how they make fun of the black leather costumes from the X-Men movies, which is something I think about a lot because I absolutely hated those. Throughout the show, we see some cameos from X-Men characters, but also non-X-Men characters. The non-X-Men characters showed how the mutants fight is one that the mutants seem to be doing alone, while the other heroes are more concerned with whatever they're doing. I thought it was cool to show that, yes, this is an X-Men show, but it's still in the Marvel Universe. There are others around doing their own little superhero thing. We see Captain America early on who tries to stop Rogue, but he's pretty much just acting like a cop and the government's puppet and isn't helpful at all, and that's why Rogue launches his shield so he can go and play fetch. Later, we see Silver Samurai, Peter Parker, Mary Jane, Flash Thompson, King T'Chaka and Nadora, Daredevil, Shadow and Dagger, and I'm sure I'm missing someone, but there was a lot. And then we even get to see other mutants like Emma Frost, who I hope we get to see more of. And then we see a shadowy glimpse of Quicksilver, Wanda, and Lorna when we're inside Magneto's mind, just to name a few. It's cool that we get to see so many familiar faces in this show. The end sees the team disappearing, and we realize that they are scattered across time and potentially universes. We see that some are in the past, where they came across a young El Salvador before he was Apocalypse. Some are in the future or an alternate future with the Summer Kids. Some we have no idea where they are. And then the crazy reveal, which is Apocalypse in Genosha, and he picks up a playing card, which is known as like a Gambit thing, hinting that he is up to something and will play a big part in season 2. My favorite part of the season was Jean, Rogue, and Storm. If you made it this far in this video, you could probably understand my appreciation for these characters. There's a moment in the final episodes where Jean says to Storm, mind the weather, and Storm responds, and make them weather your mind. And I just knew stuff was about to go down, and it did get real. I just really like how the show dealt with the different storylines of these characters and showed how they are not to be messed with. X-Men 97 Season 1 proves that reboots can be great and that animated superhero shows still seem to somehow come up on top to their live action counterparts. The voice acting was great and the stories that they chose had me very invested in wanting a new season immediately. Thank you for watching my video. I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, please do so you can keep up to date with more of my videos. But besides that, everyone stay safe, have fun, and goodbye.